Picture yourself in a crowded marketplace 600 years ago, surrounded by the smells of fresh bread and spices, the clatter of coins, and the laughter of traders. But listen closely, because woven into the cheerful melodies of wandering minstrels were secrets that could topple kingdoms, those catchy tunes you're humming along to. They weren't just entertainment, they were battle plans in disguise, carrying hidden messages that rallied entire villages to rise up against their lords. This is the untold story of how medieval peasants turned something as simple as a folk song into a weapon of rebellion, a story of cunning, courage, and the power of music to spark revolution. For centuries, historians overlooked these seemingly innocent market songs, dismissing them as mere peasant pastimes. But when you peel back the layers, you find brilliant codes hidden in plain sight, lyrics about planting crops that secretly signaled attack dates, or ballads about mythical beasts that actually named corrupt officials. The ruling class never suspected the truth because to them, these were just the ramblings of uneducated farmers. But for the oppressed, every verse was a lifeline, a way to organize across miles without ever writing a single incriminating letter. What makes this story so extraordinary isn't just the cleverness of the code, it's the sheer audacity of people with no power outsmarting an entire system designed to keep them silent. These songs traveled farther and faster than any courier, slipping past castle gates and guarded roads. They turned taverns into war rooms and minstrels into generals. And by the time the nobility realized what was happening, it was often too late. The music had already done its work. So if you've ever wondered how scattered groups of peasants could coordinate revolts across entire regions, the answer might be simpler than you think. Sometimes revolution doesn't start with a sword, it starts with a song. To understand why these hidden songs held such power, you have to grasp just how crushing peasant life could be in the Middle Ages. Imagine spending every sunrise to sunset bent over fields you didn't own, handing over a third of your harvest to a lord who'd never lifted a plow. Your children might be sent away as servants, your home could be seized over a missed tax payment, and even the fish in the river weren't truly yours to catch. Hunting rights belonged to the nobility. Yet without your labor, the entire feudal system collapsed. That tension, being indispensable but treated as disposable, created a pressure cooker of resentment. But rebellion wasn't as simple as grabbing a pitchfork and storming the castle. Medieval lords kept tight control through networks of bailiffs and soldiers, and public dissent meant brutal punishment. So peasants mastered the art of quiet resistance. They'd accidentally lose a portion of grain during tax collections, or let livestock wander onto forbidden lands. And then there were the songs, seemingly harmless tunes shared at weddings, harvest festivals, and most importantly, markets. These gatherings were the medieval internet where news and ideas traveled. A minstrel singing about a fox stealing chickens might actually be warning villagers about a tax collector's upcoming visit. A mournful ballad about a drowned shepherd could secretly mourn a rebel executed by the Lord. What's fascinating is how these songs exploited the nobility's own prejudices. Lords saw peasants as simple-minded, incapable of sophisticated communication, so they dismissed their music as childish rhymes. That arrogance became their blind spot. Meanwhile, the songs evolved into a sophisticated system. Certain phrases became triggers, like a line about when the oak leaves turn, signaling revolt in autumn. Regional dialects added another layer of secrecy. A lyric about the red cow in one valley might reference a corrupt abbot, while in the next town it meant nothing. This wasn't just folk art, it was a full-blown underground communication network. powered by the one thing even the poorest peasant could access: their voice. And the genius of it, unlike a whispered plot in a tavern, songs left no evidence. A rebel could be arrested, but the melody lived on in the crowd. Even if a lord grew suspicious, banning music would only fuel unrest. Festivals were rare joys in a peasant's hard life. So the very system designed to suppress dissent accidentally gave rebels their perfect weapon. When every plowman humming a tune could be part of something bigger, authority couldn't stamp out the message without turning every village against them. The songs weren't just organizing tools, they were psychological warfare, proving that even the voiceless could make themselves heard. Music wasn't just background noise in the medieval world, it was the heartbeat of communication. In an age where most peasants couldn't read or write, melodies became their shared language, a way to pass vital information under the noses of those in power. Picture a traveling minstrel stopping at a village market, strumming a lute while farmers gathered around. To the local lord's ears, it was mere entertainment. But to the villagers, every verse carried weight. The rhythm itself acted as a mnemonic device, making complex messages stick in the mind like glue. A song about a lost sheep returning home might signal that exiled rebels were preparing to strike. A cheerful tune about sowing seeds could secretly warn of tax collectors approaching before harvest. The brilliance of this system lay in its simplicity. Unlike written messages which could be intercepted or used as evidence, songs left no physical trace. Once a melody took root in people's minds, it spread like wildfire. From blacksmiths humming while they worked to mothers singing lullabies that doubled as coded instructions. Merchants carried these tunes along trade routes, ensuring rebellions could coordinate across regions without a single suspicious letter being exchanged. Even children became unwitting messengers, their innocent singing spreading lyrics authorities would never suspect held darker meanings. What's truly remarkable is how these songs exploited the very structure of medieval society. The nobility saw minstrels as harmless entertainers, so their movements went unchallenged. Market days, already hubs of gossip and news, became perfect cover for distributing updates through new verses. And because music was woven into daily life, from work chants to religious hymns, rebels could openly practice their seditious messages without raising alarms. A lord might crack down on whispered conversations, but banning singing, that would be like forbidding laughter. The songs also adapted brilliantly to local needs. Near the coast, fishermen's shanties might reference tides to coordinate timing. In vineyard regions, lyrics about grape harvests could signal when to mobilize. This regional flexibility made the system incredibly resilient. Even if one village code was discovered, the next town's songs sounded entirely different. And because music transcends language barriers, these melodies could unite diverse groups. A Frankish peasant might not understand Flemish, but they'd recognize the same rebel tune with adjusted lyrics. Perhaps the most powerful aspect was how these songs turned oppression into fuel for resistance. When a ballad about a cruel landlord spread, it didn't just carry information, it validated shared grievances, transforming individual anger into collective purpose. Every time someone sang the tune, they weren't just passing along words, they were renewing a silent vow: you are not alone, the revolution will be sung. Take that innocent-sounding song about the fox in the henhouse. On the surface, it's just a playful tale about a clever predator, but to a peasant's ears, that fox was the rebel leader, the chickens were the lord's grain stores, and the farmer's lazy dog. That was the corrupt sheriff who turned a blind eye to injustice. This was the secret genius of folk songs. They wrapped dangerous ideas in the guise of simple stories, using imagery so ordinary that authorities never thought to listen closer. A ballad about a storm destroying crops might actually be warning villagers of an impending tax hike, while a lullaby humming of wolves in the forest could signal that mercenaries were patrolling the roads. What made these coded lyrics so effective was how deeply they tapped into peasant life. Every metaphor came straight from the fields and barnyards, things the nobility rarely noticed, but farmers understood intimately. When a song spoke of the old grey mare stumbling, it wasn't about a horse, it meant the local lord's rule was weakening, a cheerful tune celebrating the first spring lamb. That could set the date for a rebellion, timed when winter stores ran low and tempers ran high. Even the seasons became code. Harvest songs in autumn often coincided with uprisings, when fields were empty and peasants could gather without suspicion. Some of the most powerful symbols hid in plain sight. Birds ever present in folk music were especially versatile messengers. A nightingale's song might represent a spy gathering information, while a circling hawk could stand for greedy tax collectors. In one documented case from 15th century England, a ballad about the cuckoo's stolen nest circulated before a revolt, secretly referencing the seizure of common lands by a monastery. The clergy, assuming it was just rustic poetry, never connected the song to the torches that later burned their fences. Regional differences added another layer of secrecy. A lyric about the Red River might warn of bloodshed in one valley, while in coastal towns the same phrase signaled smuggled weapons arriving by boat. This localization made the system incredibly resilient. Even if a lord cracked one village's code, the next town's songs sounded entirely different, and because these meanings were passed orally, they evolved constantly. A minstrel might tweak a refrain after hearing news at a market, ensuring messages stayed up to date without a single incriminating document. The true mastery of these songs lay in their dual purpose. They didn't just convey information, they stoked the fires of rebellion. A mournful tune about a family starving because the miller took his share didn't just describe hardship, it reminded every listener exactly who to blame. Over time, certain melodies became so associated with resistance that simply humming them was an act of defiance. When lords finally caught on and banned specific songs, new versions would emerge within days, their meanings shifting like shadows. This wasn't just communication, it was cultural warfare, proving that even the smallest folk could outthink the mightiest castle walls. These wandering minstrels were the perfect spies of the medieval world, trusted faces who showed up with new songs as predictably as the seasons. To the nobility, they were just harmless performers, there to distract the masses with silly rhymes and crude jokes, but that very dismissal gave them extraordinary power. While knights guarded roads and castles watched for armed rebels, minstrels strolled right through the gates, their instruments slung over their shoulders like passports to every corner of the realm. Some minstrels were true believers, risking their lives to carry rebel messages between villages. Others started as mere sympathizers until the songs they sang, full of hidden cries for justice, awoke something fiercer in them. There are records of minstrels who secretly mapped castle layouts into lyrics, disguising weak points in fortifications as verses about the crumbling old wall where the ivy grows thick. One notorious case from 14th century France tells of a minstrel who performed at a count's banquet, singing a bawdy tune about a drunken knight while secretly using the melody to teach nearby peasants the garrison's changing of the guard schedule. What made them so effective wasn't just their mobility, it was their artistry. A skilled minstrel could improvise new verses on the spot, adapting lyrics to fit local grievances without missing a beat. If a village was suffering under a new tax, the song's "Hungry Wolf" might suddenly become a tax collector by the second chorus. Their performances were living documents, updated in real time as they traveled. And because music was currency in taverns, they could pay for information with songs, coaxing details from drunk guards or disgruntled servants who'd never speak to a rebel outright. But the most revolutionary minstrels did more than carry messages. They weaponized storytelling. A ballad about a legendary hero defeating a tyrant wasn't just entertainment. It was proof that change was possible. When peasants heard tales of characters like Robin Hood, often sung with knowing winks, they weren't just hearing a story, they were seeing a blueprint. Some minstrels even staged mock battles in their performances, using coded choreography to secretly teach combat maneuvers. A dramatic sword fight between actors might actually demonstrate how to disarm a mounted knight, while a comic chase scene could outline escape routes through dense forests. The irony: many lords adored these performers, oblivious that their court entertainers might be sowing seeds of rebellion. A minstrel praised for his wit today could be whispering revolt plans to kitchen staff tomorrow. And when crackdowns came, minstrels had the perfect defense: plausible deniability. Just a song, my lord, they'd shrug, even as their melodies echoed through villages, turning whispers into war cries. Their true power lay in the one thing feudal systems couldn't control: the human ear. Once a tune took root in people's minds, no army could burn it out. The Jackery Rebellion of 1358 in France wasn't just a violent outburst, it was a masterpiece of hidden coordination, with music as its silent conductor. As tensions between peasants and nobles reached a breaking point after decades of war and famine, something extraordinary happened across the countryside. Ordinary farmers who'd never held a sword began humming the same tunes, their lyrics dripping with double meanings. A cheerful harvest song about the wolf among the sheep wasn't about livestock, it was a warning that noble patrols were near. And when minstrels sang of cutting the thistle before it chokes the field, everyone knew what it really meant: strike now before the nobility crushes us completely. What made the Jackery so remarkable was its speed. Within weeks, thousands of peasants from scattered villages moved as one, burning manor houses and tearing down tax records. How did word spread so fast without written orders? The answer lies in the market squares, where traveling performers sang ballads that seemed harmless to noble ears but carried urgent instructions to rebel ears. One surviving account describes a minstrel performing a comic song about the lazy crow who steals the corn, a direct jab at greedy landlords. By the time local lords realized the song was fueling unrest, it had already reached a dozen villages, each adding new verses that adapted the message to local grievances. The rebellion's most famous musical signal was the dawn chorus. Peasants who'd spent lifetimes waking before sunrise understood the power of that first light. So when songs urged them to rise with the lark or meet where the morning star falls, it wasn't poetic whimsy, it was a precise call to arms timed for when noble guards were least alert. Regional variations made the system even more effective. Near Paris, lyrics about the river running red warned of approaching royal troops, while in the south, a shepherd's tune about lost sheep actually listed safe meeting spots in the hills. Yet the Jackery also revealed the limits of musical codes. When nobles finally cracked some lyrics, they retaliated with brutal executions of minstrels, forcing rebels to improvise new songs mid-revolt. Some melodies grew so dangerous that simply whistling them became punishable by death, yet still they spread, mutating faster than authorities could ban them. In the end, the rebellion was crushed, but its songs outlived the violence. For generations afterward, French peasants sang modified versions of those same tunes, their original meanings fading into folk memory while keeping alive the spirit of defiance. The Jackery proved something terrifying to those in power. Once music carries a revolution, you can kill the singers, but you can't kill the song. Even the holiest spaces weren't safe from the quiet revolution humming through medieval Europe. Churches, the very heart of village life, became unlikely stages for rebellion, not with shouts or swords, but through the solemn strains of hymns. Picture this, a congregation singing praise, their voices rising together under the watchful eyes of priests and local lords. But hidden in those familiar melodies were words twisted just enough to carry a dangerous message. A line about the meek inheriting the earth might subtly shift to the meek reclaiming their bread, turning scripture into a protest against grain hoarding by the wealthy. These weren't random changes, they were carefully crafted acts of defiance disguised as devotion. What made him such perfect vessels for rebellion was their universal respectability. No noble would suspect a choir singing sacred music, even if the lyrics now spoke of shepherds abandoning their flocks, a veiled jab at absentee bishops living in luxury. Some of the most biting critiques hid in plain sight within Latin verses, knowing few outside the clergy understood the language. A hymn to Saint Michael fighting demons could quietly become a call to resist corrupt officials, with each "deliver us from evil" dripping with double meaning. Even the act of communal singing reinforced solidarity. When dozens of voices joined in a modified refrain, it wasn't just prayer, it was a promise. Cleverest of all were the hymns that weaponized the church's own teachings. A song about Christ driving moneylenders from the temple took on new edge when sung after a greedy abbot raised rents. Peasants who'd memorized every note of the original could detect the slightest lyrical shift, while authorities heard only piety. In one documented case from Germany, rebels altered an Advent hymn about preparing the way for the Lord, changing it to urge preparing the way for justice. The local baron, none the wiser, reportedly complimented the choir on their devotion. This sacred subversion reached its peak during pilgrimages and religious festivals, when crowds gathered from distant regions. A hymn taught at one shrine could spread across kingdoms within months, its modified lyrics crossing borders faster than any rebel courier. Some clergy actively participated, turning blind eyes to mistakes in lyric sheets or choosing hymns with conveniently ambiguous themes. Others unwittingly became messengers themselves, teaching altered versions they'd learned from traveling monks. The system was so effective because it exploited the medieval world's greatest taboo: who would dare accuse a holy man of spreading sedition through song. Yet the real power of these hymns lay in their emotional resonance. Unlike market ballads, which could be banned as frivolous, sacred music touched something deeper. When peasants sang a hymn about the Last Judgment with new verses condemning hoarders, it wasn't just strategy. It framed their struggle as morally righteous. A lord might crush rebels in the field, but challenging their faith that risked turning the entire village against him. So the music played on Sunday after Sunday, until the line between prayer and protest blurred into something unstoppable. The altar had become the revolution's loudspeaker, and every amen was a battle cry in disguise. Across the patchwork of medieval Europe, rebel songs were as diverse as the landscapes themselves, each region weaving its grievances into melodies that fit like gloves. In England, where forests stretched thick and green, ballads of Robin Hood became the perfect vessel for rebellion. On the surface, these were tales of a cheerful outlaw stealing from the rich, but between the lines, a masterclass in anti-authoritarian coding. When singers crooned about Robin's band hiding in Sherwood, peasants heard instructions for evading tax collectors. Lyrics praising his arrows found their mark doubled as lessons in precision strikes against noble manners. Even the merry tone was strategic. Who would suspect a drinking song of plotting revolution? Meanwhile, in the German principalities, where beer halls buzzed with laughter, rebels turned tavern songs into weapons. A rowdy tune about a drunken lord stumbling into a pigsty wasn't just humor, it stripped nobility of their dignity one verse at a time. Peasants perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, singing toasts that sounded like praise but mocked their overlord's incompetence. Some lyrics played on German folklore, like replacing dragons in old tales with greedy bishops. The genius lay in the audience's collusion. When everyone chuckled at the right moment, it wasn't just entertainment, it was a silent pact of shared contempt. Down in Mediterranean vineyards, the rebellion took on a different rhythm. Italian peasants wrapped their defiance in wine-making metaphors, singing about sour grapes when landlords raised rents. A ballad's refrain, "The barrel gives what the vine deserves," wasn't about fermentation. It warned that exploitation would backfire. These songs often borrowed church melodies, making them easy to memorize while dodging suspicion. In one documented case, Tuscan workers staged a harvest festival where their song's cheerful surface hid lyrics listing which roads would be blockaded come dawn. The colder climates of Scandinavia bred rebellion with a different cadence. Here, where winters were long and dark, songs leaned on nature's brutality. Icelandic cave, either ballads about farmers surviving blizzards became allegories for enduring oppression, with each verse subtly reinforcing communal loyalty. A Norwegian fishing song's cry of "pull together or the net snaps" wasn't just work encouragement, it was a call for unified resistance. Even children's rhymes carried weight. A Swedish counting song about 10 nights frozen in the snow taught young ones that noble power had limits. What united these regional variations wasn't the melodies but their shared cunning. Whether through English irony, German mockery, or Mediterranean metaphor, peasants exploited their rulers' blind spots, the assumption that local culture was too crude to hide complexity. A French lord might intercept a Flemish rebel's letter, but who would interrogate a nursery rhyme? The song's true power lay in their adaptability, proving that oppression might be universal, but resistance always wore a local face. From the peat bogs of Ireland to the olive groves of Greece, music became the one language that tyranny couldn't confiscate or silence. Marketplaces were the social media platforms of the Middle Ages, bustling hubs where news, gossip, and culture spread at the speed of a catchy melody. Picture a traveling minstrel setting up in the corner of a busy square, his lute drawing a crowd of farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. To the sheriff watching from the steps of the Guildhall, it's just another performer earning his coins. But beneath the lively strumming, something far more dangerous is unfolding. With every chorus sung along to, every foot tapped in rhythm, rebellious ideas seep into the collective consciousness, ready to be carried home in the minds of 100 different listeners. What made markets so perfect for this underground communication wasn't just the crowds, it was the chaos. In the jostle of bargaining and bartering, no one noticed a miller humming a new tune to his neighbor, or a blacksmith subtly changing the words as he joined in. The very noise that made markets vibrant also made them ideal for secrecy. A minstrel could drop a veiled lyric about the harvest being stolen, and while a noble's agent heard only a rustic metaphor, every peasant recognized it as a warning about impending grain taxes. And because market days were regular events, rebels could rely on them like clockwork. A minstrel appearing on the first Tuesday of the month might mean it was time to pass updated plans. The genius of this system lay in its natural camouflage. Unlike a secret meeting in a barn which might draw suspicion, a market performance required no explanation. Merchants welcomed minstrels because they drew customers. Local officials tolerated them as harmless entertainment. Even the songs themselves were designed to sound frivolous to untrained ears. A ballad about a cobbler outwitting a greedy merchant might amuse the nobility while secretly mocking their own exploitative practices. By the time anyone realized the joke was on them, the lyrics had already spread to the next town over. Geography played a crucial role too. Markets weren't isolated, they were nodes in a vast network. A song debuted in a Flanders wool market might surface weeks later in a French wine region, adapted to local grievances but carrying the same core message. Pilgrims en route to shrines, peddlers moving between fairs, even soldiers on leave, all became unwitting carriers of these musical memes. In an era when most people rarely traveled beyond their village, markets became the exception, making them the perfect vector for ideas that needed to spread further than any single rebel could walk. Perhaps most remarkably, this system was self-sustaining. Unlike written pamphlets that required literacy or secret symbols that needed decoding, songs lived in the air. A farmer might forget a speech he'd heard, but the tune he'd sung with 50 others, that stuck. And because folk music thrives on variation, each retelling allowed the message to evolve organically. A verse about a cruel landlord in one town might transform into a warning about tax collectors in the next, all while keeping the melody intact as the unifying thread. The marketplace, with its constant flux of people and ideas, became the petri dish where musical resistance could mutate, adapt, and survive, the ultimate proof of this system's effectiveness. How rarely it was detected. While lords burned seditious pamphlets and posted guards near rebel taverns, minstrels kept performing in plain sight. After all, banning music would have meant banning the very thing that made medieval life bearable for the poor. So the songs played on, their true meanings hidden in the one place no one thought to look: the sound of laughter in the marketplace. The real magic of these rebel songs wasn't just in their melodies, it was in the layers of meaning hidden within seemingly ordinary words. Take something as simple as a lyric about meeting by the old oak tree. To an outsider, it sounded like a harmless rural reference, but to a peasant plotting rebellion, that oak tree wasn't just any tree, it was a specific landmark near a disused mill, chosen because its hollow trunk could hide weapons. The genius of this coding lay in its simplicity. By using familiar elements from daily life, landmarks, weather patterns, even farm animals, rebels created a system where every villager could understand the message, while nobles dismissed it as rustic nonsense. Numbers posed a particular challenge, since singing explicit dates would be far too obvious, so rebels got creative. A song about 12 geese flying south might signal a meeting on the 12th day of the month, while a mournful verse lamenting 7 lost lambs could mean the attack was set for 7 days after market day. Even children's counting rhymes weren't safe from subversion. A playful tune about 10 green bottles hanging on a wall sometimes referenced the number of guards posted at a nearby manor. The beauty of this system was its flexibility. If plans changed, a minstrel could easily tweak the numbers in performance, updating the entire village without a single incriminating scrap of paper. Place names got especially clever treatment. Since outright naming a location was risky, rebels developed an entire vocabulary of symbolic references. A ballad about the widow's cottage by the crooked stream might point to a safe house near a bend in the river, while lyrics praising the high field where the wheat grows tall could indicate a rallying point on elevated ground with clear sightlines. Regional dialects added another layer of secrecy. What one village called the Devil's Footprint might be known as the Shepherd's Leap 2 valleys over, making codes unintelligible to outsiders. Some songs even used seasonal changes as cues. A line about when the blackberries ripen didn't just mark summer's peak, it synchronized revolts across regions where berries ripened at different times, ensuring attacks happened when each area was strongest. The most sophisticated codes played with language itself. Double meanings turned innocent words into weapons. A fox wasn't just an animal but a rebel scout, while thunder stood for the sound of marching soldiers. In one documented case from Burgundy, a minstrel's song about the crow's crooked path secretly mapped a smuggler's route through marshlands, with each twist in the lyrics corresponding to a turn in the terrain. Rebels also exploited the musical structure, using pauses or repeated choruses to emphasize key details. A sudden stop after "the moon rises" might mean wait for nightfall, while an unusually drawn-out final note could signal danger. What made these techniques so enduring was their deniability. A lord hearing a song about the miller's greedy son might chuckle at the rustic humor, never realizing it mocked his own tax policies. Even if suspicions arose, the lyrics could always be explained away as folk poetry after all. Who could prove a reference to the thorny rose wasn't just a flower but a veiled threat against the local bailiff. This plausible ambiguity gave peasants something precious: the ability to organize in plain sight, turning every harvest festival and tavern sing-along into a potential war council. The songs didn't just carry messages, they were living, evolving blueprints for revolution, written in a language only the oppressed could fully understand. To sing the wrong words in the wrong company wasn't just risky, it was a death sentence. Imagine a minstrel strumming a seemingly innocent ballad in a tavern, only for a noble's agent to freeze mid-sip, recognizing a rebel code hidden in the chorus. That moment of realization could turn a lively performance into a death march. Authorities didn't just punish rebels, they made examples of them. A minstrel caught spreading seditious lyrics might find himself hanging from the castle walls, his tongue cut out to silence the song forever. Peasants humming forbidden tunes faced floggings, brandings, or worse, their families thrown off the land to starve as a warning to others. This ever-present danger forced rebels to become masters of subtlety. Where early songs might have dared to name corrupt officials in veiled terms, later versions replaced even those hints with metaphors so ordinary they seemed harmless. A lyric about the north wind biting sharp no longer just hinted at a cruel lord, it specified his cavalry's approach from the northern road. The more brutal the crackdowns, the more ingenious the codes became. In some regions, the very act of repeating a chorus took on new meaning. Singing a line twice might confirm a meeting place, while skipping a verse could signal that spies were nearby. The stakes transformed minstrels into tightrope walkers of language. Some developed tricks to test their audience, starting with harmless verses and only weaving in dangerous lines if they spotted sympathetic faces in the crowd. Others used regional dialects as a shield, knowing a song's true meaning would be lost on outsiders. There are accounts of performers deliberately slurring key lyrics when authorities were present, then singing them clearly later in private gatherings. The most daring hid messages in the spaces between notes, using pauses or rhythm changes to convey what words could not. A sudden slowdown during a cheerful tune might warn listeners to delay their plans, while an unusually quick refrain could urge haste. What's chilling is how the nobility's paranoia fed the system's evolution. When lords banned specific songs, rebels simply created new ones with identical meanings but different melodies. In one case from 15th century Spain, authorities arrested a minstrel for singing the Ballad of the Thorny Rose, only for an almost identical song titled The Gardener's Lament to appear weeks later, its lyrics slightly altered but its coded instructions intact. The harder authorities tried to stamp out the music, the more fluid and untraceable it became. Yet the greatest protection wasn't in the notes or words, it was in the people themselves. Whole villages would feign ignorance when interrogated, insisting a suspect song was just an old lullaby. Children, often used as messengers because they were less likely to be punished, could innocently claim they'd learned a tune from a traveler. Even the nobility's own households became unwitting accomplices. Kitchen maids would hum rebel songs while baking, their status making them above suspicion. This collective complicity created something astonishing, a resistance movement where the evidence literally vanished into thin air the moment the singing stopped. The ultimate irony, some of the most effective rebel songs survived precisely because they were punished. When authorities banned a melody, it often gained mythical status, ensuring peasants remembered every word. A minstrel's execution might scatter his songs wider than he ever could have in life, as witnesses carried the forbidden tunes to new regions like sparks on the wind. In the end, the very brutality meant to silence dissent only proved what rebels had known all along: you can kill the singer, but the song, that's immortal. Women moved through medieval society like shadows, unseen but everywhere, their voices weaving rebellion into the fabric of daily life. While male minstrels traveled between taverns, women perfected a quieter form of resistance, turning hearths and nurseries into revolutionary classrooms. A mother humming a lullaby about the wolf at the door might actually be teaching her children to recognize noble scouts approaching the village. A group of women singing, weaving songs in unison could synchronize rhythms that secretly counted down days until an uprising. Their greatest weapon, the assumption that women's work and women's music was trivial. Tavern maids became masters of this covert craft. While serving ale to off-duty soldiers, they'd pick up strategic details and encode them into drinking songs, letting the lyrics slip during rowdy choruses. A bawdy tune about a milkmaid outsmarting a knight wasn't just entertainment. It might contain coded warnings about which roads were being patrolled. Because women were rarely perceived as threats, their songs traveled farther with less scrutiny. Even noble households weren't immune. Kitchen servants adapted hymns while kneading dough, changing lyrics about biblical manna into subtle protests against grain hoarding. The genius of women's musical resistance lay in its invisibility. While authorities watched for armed rebels in fields, dangerous messages spread through spinning circles where women sang work songs. The repetitive motions of carding wool or grinding grain provided perfect cover for rhythmic patterns that signaled meeting times. A verse about threads snapping when pulled too tight could critique feudal obligations, while a chorus counting stitches might actually tally rebel numbers. These gatherings were so ordinary they never raised suspicion, yet they functioned as clandestine communication hubs. Some of the most effective carriers were wet nurses and midwives, whose work took them between peasant cottages and noble manors. A lullaby soothing a baron's infant might contain lyrics overheard by rebel servants, while the same woman could later modify the tune for peasant ears, adding verses about the cuckoo who steals nests to describe land seizures. Their mobility between social spheres made them ideal messengers, trusted by both sides yet truly loyal to neither. Perhaps most remarkably, women preserved these songs across generations. While written records were dangerous to keep, oral traditions passed mother to daughter kept rebel melodies alive for centuries. A spinning song from the 14th century might resurface with updated lyrics during the 18th century bread riots, its core message adapting but never fading. This longevity gave women's musical resistance an endurance that flashier revolts lacked. After all, you can burn a rebel's manifesto, but try silencing a lullaby whispered in the dark. The ultimate testament to their success, how few were ever caught. Unlike male minstrels who faced execution when codes were cracked, women's songs flew under the radar until they'd already done their work. By the time a lord realized the nursery rhyme his own children sang contained seditious wordplay, half his province would be humming it. The revolution wasn't just in the streets, it was in the steady rhythm of the loom, the murmur of the cradle, the timeless sound of women turning daily life into defiance. The drumbeat you're hearing isn't just keeping time, it's a secret conversation. Across medieval Europe, instruments became the unsung heroes of rebellion. their rhythms and pitches carrying messages too dangerous for words. Picture a shepherd playing his flute at dusk, the notes floating innocently over the fields. To a passing noble, it's just another rustic melody. But to the peasant listening from the next hill, those rising and falling tones are spelling out how many soldiers are garrisoned in the nearby castle. This was the brilliance of instrumental codes. They left no paper trail, required no literacy, and could be denied with a shrug. Just practicing, my lord, a musician could say, even as his drumbeats mapped out escape routes through the forest. Drums were especially powerful tools. Their deep, resonant sound traveled farther than voices, making them perfect for coordinating actions across wide areas. In the thick of a revolt, a rapid series of beats might signal that royal troops were approaching from the east, while a slow, steady rhythm could mean hold your position. Some villages developed entire systems where the interval between strikes conveyed numbers: 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more might mean 3 days until the next moon, when the attack would begin. The rhythms blended seamlessly into celebrations and festivals, hiding urgent messages in what sounded like wedding music or harvest dances. Wind instruments offered even more nuance. A flute's pitch could indicate direction: higher notes for north, lower for south, while the length of a sustained tone might specify distances. In one documented case from the Swiss Alps, herders used yodeling calls to warn neighboring valleys of tax collectors' movements, transforming a traditional alpine skill into a rebel telegraph. Bagpipes, with their piercing drones, became particularly useful in Scotland, where specific grace notes woven into familiar tunes could alert entire glens to muster points or danger. The true mastery lay in how these sounds exploited the natural environment. A lone horn blast echoing off cliffs might mean one thing in a mountain pass and something entirely different in a dense forest. Rebels tuned their signals to local acoustics: short, sharp notes for wooded areas where sound died quickly, long, rolling patterns for open plains. Even the time of day changed meanings. A morning birdsong imitation could be harmless, while the same whistle at night signaled an urgent meeting. What made instrumental codes nearly impossible to crack was their fluidity. Unlike written words which stayed fixed, a melody could shift meaning with the slightest tweak. A minstrel might play the same tune at 2 different taverns, altering only the tempo to indicate whether the next phase of the plan was advancing or delayed. Regional differences added another layer of security. A drum pattern warning of danger in one province might be part of a festival dance in another. Authorities couldn't ban all music without sparking unrest, so the songs played on, their true messages hidden in the spaces between the notes. Perhaps the most haunting examples come from sieges, where instruments became literal lifelines. Chronicles describe besieged towns using trumpet calls to coordinate food rationing, with specific fanfares indicating which gates were safest for smuggling supplies. In reverse, attacking forces sometimes mimicked those signals to sow confusion, a cruel twist that showed how easily music could become a weapon. Yet even in the darkest moments, the right sequence of notes could rally hope. A single familiar tune played from a hidden pipe might tell a starving village, "Hold on, the cavalry is coming." The legacy of these sonic codes lingers today in folk traditions. That upbeat jig at a Renaissance fair, its ancestor might once have synchronized 100 rebels at once. The lullaby your grandmother hummed, its rhythm could trace back to a time when music wasn't just art, it was survival. Because in a world where the powerless had so few tools, they learned to turn sound itself into a language of resistance, proving that sometimes the most dangerous messages aren't spoken at all. They're felt in the bones, carried on the wind, and remembered in the pulse of a drum that never truly stops. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, It didn't just claim lives, it shattered the very illusion of feudal order. As corpses piled high and entire villages vanished, the surviving peasants faced a grim realization. Their so-called protectors, the nobles who demanded their labor and loyalty, had fled behind castle walls, leaving commoners to die. Out of this betrayal, a new ferocity pulsed through rebel songs. Lyrics once veiled in metaphor now dripped with open scorn, comparing lords to rats abandoning a sinking ship. The plague had exposed the brutal truth that peasant lives were disposable, and music became the scalpel that peeled back the pretense of noble benevolence for all to see. The chaos of the pandemic inadvertently gave rebels their greatest advantage, distraction. With officials overwhelmed by death tolls and quarantines, the usual surveillance of peasant gatherings slackened. Market squares, once carefully monitored, now hosted singers whose lyrics grew bolder by the day. A ballad about the reaper's unfair hand no longer just hinted at inequality. It named names, accusing specific lords of hoarding grain while children starved. The sheer scale of death also created unexpected opportunities. Traditional power structures crumbled as entire noble families perished, leaving gaps in authority that rebel networks quickly filled. Traveling minstrels, once viewed with mild suspicion, now moved freely between plague-emptied towns, their songs stitching together a patchwork of resistance across the fractured landscape. Some of the most potent songs emerged from the ruins of monastic communities. As monks, often the only literate villagers, succumbed to plague, peasants repurposed their sacred melodies into biting satire. A hymn praising saintly sacrifice might be rewritten to mock nobles who sacrificed peasants instead of protecting them. These adaptations carried extra weight because they hijacked the church's own musical authority, turning holy words against the very system that claimed divine right. In one chilling example from England, a requiem mass for plague victims subtly shifted its Latin lyrics to accuse local abbots of charging for burials while their own monasteries overflowed with stolen harvests. The demographic upheaval also reshaped the songs themselves. With so many elders dead, younger survivors, less bound by tradition, began composing melodies that blended regional styles, creating a pan-European musical language of dissent. A Breton sailor's shanty might merge with an Italian work song, its hybrid rhythm carrying rebellion farther than ever before. The plague's indiscriminate toll also forged unexpected alliances. Songs once confined to peasant circles now found sympathetic ears among minor nobles who'd lost everything, their added refinements making the lyrics even more cutting. Yet the Black Death's greatest gift to rebel music was psychological. When half a village perishes, survivors stop fearing death, and when fear vanishes, so does obedience. Ballads from this period throbbed with a newfound audacity, their lyrics no longer begging for mercy but demanding justice. A German folk song from 1351 put it bluntly: "The pestilence took our children, the lords take our bread, what more can they take but our chains?" This shift from coded grumbling to open defiance marked a turning point. The music that had once whispered now shouted, and in its echoes the peasants heard something revolutionary, their own power. Ironically, the plague's devastation made suppression harder. With fewer soldiers to enforce bans, forbidden songs spread like, a contagion. Authorities who tried punishing singers often faced riots from crowds already pushed to the brink. In Flanders, when a duke ordered a minstrel's hands cut off for performing an anti-noble ballad, 300 plague survivors stormed the jail, their voices raised in the very song he'd been arrested for. The message was clear: after surviving the Black Death, peasants had nothing left to lose and their music would no longer be silenced. What emerged from this crucible wasn't just angrier songs, but smarter ones. The plague had taught rebels the value of adaptability, and their music reflected it. Verses now included contingency plans. If one line was banned, alternate lyrics preserved the meaning. Melodies became modular, allowing quick changes to evade detection. The Black Death hadn't just given peasants reasons to rebel, it had forged them into more cunning revolutionaries. Their music, once a tool of protest, was now a weapon, and it was sharpened on the whetstone of unimaginable loss. This phenomenon of hidden musical resistance wasn't confined to medieval Europe. It echoed across oceans and centuries, proving that when people are pushed to the edge, they'll turn even melody into a weapon. Take the spirituals born from slavery in the American South, where songs like "Wade in the Water" weren't just hymns of hope. They were navigation tools, their lyrics warning fleeing slaves to stick to rivers to throw off bloodhounds, a survival tactic disguised as scripture. Parallels to medieval Europe are uncanny. Both cultures used sacred music as cover, transforming biblical stories into maps and warnings right under their oppressors' noses. Halfway across the world, in the Andes Mountains, indigenous people under Spanish rule wove rebellion into their panpipe melodies. A seemingly festive tune might count the days until an uprising, just like medieval peasants timing revolts to harvest songs. Even the instruments themselves became symbols. The charango, made from armadillo shells, was a quiet protest after Spaniards banned traditional drums. Like minstrels strumming lutes, Andean musicians turned everyday objects into acts of defiance. The 20th century saw this tradition evolve with new urgency. During South Africa's apartheid, protest songs like "Senzani Na," "What Have We Done?" became the heartbeat of resistance, their Zulu lyrics uniting crowds while baffling police. Just as medieval lords dismissed peasant ballads as nonsense, white authorities underestimated these songs until stadiums shook with their power. Even Nazi Germany couldn't stamp out the Edelweiss pirates, working-class youth who rewrote Hitler Youth anthems with anti-fascist lyrics, proving that no tyranny can silence a clever enough tune. What ties these movements together is their shared understanding of music's unique strengths. Like medieval market songs, Negro spirituals used call and response patterns to teach routes on the Underground Railroad without written instructions. Chilean protesters under Pinochet hid subversive messages in folk dances, just as Flemish weavers encoded plans in loom rhythms. Whether it's a Vietnamese hat roo, lullaby warning of approaching soldiers, or Irish rebels smuggling battle plans in drinking songs, the pattern is universal. Melody slips past barriers that words alone cannot penetrate. The most striking similarity lies in how these songs weaponized their oppressors' arrogance. Slaveholders mistook spirituals for docile piety, just as medieval nobles laughed at peasant rhymes. Both failed to grasp that the very simplicity they mocked was the system's genius. When everyone from grandmothers to children can carry a message in their hum, resistance becomes as contagious as a chorus. Even today, from Belarusian protesters chanting folk tunes to Iranian women turning nursery rhymes into feminist anthems, this ancient tactic lives on. Because when your voice is all you have, you'll make sure it sings louder than their chains. At first, the nobility dismissed peasant songs as harmless nonsense until the day the melodies started burning down their manners. The moment lords realized those catchy tunes were rallying cries, the musical arms race began. Authorities in London issued one of the earliest known bans in 1381, prohibiting certain ballads that stir the commons to mischief. But outlawing music proved trickier than expected. When the Duke of Burgundy banned a popular harvest song, peasants simply changed the lyrics, keeping the melody intact. Soon, entire councils were debating how to silence songs that lived in people's heads rather than on paper. Desperate to counter rebel messaging, some lords turned to the very people they'd once scorned: minstrels. Wealthy households began retaining their own troubadours, paying them to compose loyal songs praising noble benevolence. These counter-ballads followed rebel tactics but twisted them where peasants sang of starving children. Court minstrels crooned about lords generously forgiving debts. One surviving example from Normandy rewrote a rebel tune about stolen grain into a jolly ode to the kindly baron who fills our sacks. The propaganda war grew so intense that some regions had competing versions of the same melody circulating simultaneously, each faction trying to drown out the other in taverns and markets. Church authorities joined the fray with their own weapon, the pulpit. Priests began weaving warnings against false songs into sermons, declaring certain melodies sinful. In Lincolnshire, a bishop ordered parishioners to report anyone humming a particular ballad about the greedy crow, equating it with heresy. Some monasteries went further, commissioning elaborate hymns that mimicked rebel musical styles but promoted obedience. A brilliant, if sinister, example comes from Bavaria, where monks set the 10 Commandments to the tune of a banned revolutionary song, hoping to overwrite the original in peasants' minds. The crackdowns forced rebels to innovate. Songs grew more abstract, their meanings hidden in seemingly nonsensical wordplay. A nonsense rhyme about 3 blind mice might reference 3 corrupt officials, while a lullaby's repetitive hush could count down days until an uprising. Regional dialects became encryption tools. A lyric clear in one village accent was gibberish to outsiders. Minstrels developed tricks like singing certain lines backward or inserting pauses that altered meanings. The most cunning rebels exploited noble paranoia, planting fake, coded songs to send authorities chasing shadows while the real plans traveled via innocuous-seeming work chants. This cat-and-mouse game reached absurd heights in 15th century Florence, where the Medici family employed musicians to compose pro-government madrigals only for street singers to parody them within hours. One chronicle describes a nobleman's feast where the hired minstrel proudly performed a new loyalty anthem, unaware the kitchen staff were giggling. They'd heard the same melody with rebel lyrics that morning. The aristocracy's obsession with controlling music sometimes backfired spectacularly. When King Henry Roman IV of England banned all ballads mentioning Robin Hood, the outlaw's legend only grew, with peasants adopting new code names like the Man in Green or the Merry Archer. What authorities never fully grasped was that their repression fed the very fire they feared. Every banned song gained mystique. Every arrested minstrel became a martyr. A melody that might have faded from memory instead lived on in whispers, its meaning growing sharper with each act of censorship. The Lord's greatest weakness was their inability to imagine that peasants, people they considered barely human, could outthink them. But in the end, the rebels proved that while you can chain a singer, you can't chain a song. And sometimes the right tune at the right moment can shake thrones. The golden age of musical rebellion couldn't last forever. As the Renaissance dawned and the printing press began churning out pamphlets by the thousands, peasants no longer needed to hide their discontent in melodies. Why whisper plans in a song when you could print them boldly on a leaflet and nail it to the church door? The spread of literacy didn't just change how people communicated, it stripped music of its monopoly on secret messaging. By the 16th century, a single printed ballad could spread revolutionary ideas faster than a minstrel could walk from one village to the next, and with far less risk of interception. Yet the transition wasn't immediate. For decades, old habits died hard. In remote villages where books remained rare, songs still carried coded meanings passed down like heirlooms. Some minstrels adapted by becoming pamphleteers themselves, setting their new printed verses to familiar rebel tunes, a clever way to ensure the message stuck. But the writing was on the wall, quite literally. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to that Wittenberg church door in 1517, he didn't set them to a catchy melody. The age of Reformation and Revolution would be fought with ink as much as with iron. Ironically, the very technology that made songs obsolete for organizing also preserved their legacy. Early printers, hungry for content, began collecting folk ballads, including many that had once been rebel anthems. What had been dangerous code in one century became harmless nostalgia in the next. A lyric about the fox in the henhouse might have once sparked a riot, but printed in a cheap chapbook, it was just a quaint rural tale. Yet something profound lingered in those melodies. Even stripped of their revolutionary meanings, the songs carried echoes of defiance that still resonated. Folk traditions became the guardians of this fading history. As generations passed, the original contexts blurred, but the emotional core remained. A lullaby about the wolf at the door might no longer warn of tax collectors, but it still spoke of protection and vigilance. Harvest festivals kept alive the rhythms that once synchronized uprisings, now repurposed for dancing. The songs evolved, but their DNA, the shared experience of resistance, stayed woven into the cultural fabric. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was how these melodies shaped later protest movements. When 19th century labor activists needed rallying cries, they didn't start from scratch. They borrowed tunes from medieval ballads, their familiar rhythms now carrying Union slogans. Even today, traces of those old codes survive in unexpected places. The call and response structure of civil rights anthems, it mirrors how minstrels once taught rebel plans line by line. The protest songs of the 1960s, they owe their emotional punch to the same techniques peasants perfected: simple lyrics with layered meanings, meant to be sung together, binding voices into a single force. The music may have lost its urgency as a tool of rebellion, but it gained something perhaps more powerful: immortality. Those medieval peasants couldn't have imagined their work songs would one day inspire movements they'd never see, or that their secret codes would become celebrated folk art. Yet every time someone taps their foot to a centuries-old jig or feels a chill at a mournful ballad's unresolved ending, they're touching a thread that stretches back to market squares and midnight meetings, to a time when melody wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. The songs stopped being weapons, but they never stopped telling the truth. The spirit of those medieval rebel songs never truly faded. It just found new instruments and new voices. Centuries after minstrels smuggled revolutionary messages in market ballads, music remains the heartbeat of protest, proving that when people lack power, melody becomes their megaphone. Think of the civil rights movement in 1960s America, where spirituals like "We Shall Overcome" did more than rally marches. They continued the ancient tradition of encoding strength in song. Just as medieval peasants used harvest tunes to synchronize uprisings, black activists adapted hymns to coordinate sit-ins, their call and response patterns mirroring the way minstrels once taught rebel plans line by line. The parallels are uncanny. Both movements turned the oppressor's blind spot, their dismissal of simple folk music, into a strategic advantage. Punk rock in 1970s Britain carried the same defiant DNA. When bands like The Clash snarled lyrics about police brutality and unemployment, they channeled the same raw energy as Flemish weavers singing of corrupt guild masters. The Sex Pistols' "God Save the Queen" wasn't just a song, it was a medieval-style broadside against the establishment, its jarring chords as disruptive as any peasant revolt. Even the DIY ethos of punk mirrored medieval rebels' resourcefulness. Just as peasants repurposed farm tools into weapons, punks turned 3 chords and a sneer into cultural shrapnel. What's fascinating is how modern protest music still relies on many of the same tricks medieval minstrels perfected. Chilean folk singer Victor Jara hid anti-Pinochet messages in love songs, much like peasants wrapped battle plans in ballads about shepherds. Belarusian protesters in 2020 used traditional folk dances to coordinate movements under dictator Lukashenko's nose, their swirling patterns concealing signals as effectively as any 14th century market tune. Even hip-hop continues the tradition, with rappers from Tupac to Kendrick Lamar embedding social commentary in metaphors that fly under mainstream radar today's equivalent of singing about foxes instead of tax collectors. The internet age has added new layers to this ancient practice. Viral protest songs now spread at the speed of a click, yet they still harness music's primal power to unite strangers. When Iranian women recorded themselves singing Barre during the 2022 uprising, their voices became a digital version of those medieval market squares, a shared space where dissent could flourish. TikTok videos of protesters in Hong Kong humming the band Glory to Hong Kong anthem demonstrate how melodies still evade censorship better than plain speech. Technology changes, but the core strategy remains. Make the message memorable, make it collective, and make it deniable. Perhaps the most profound lesson from medieval rebel songs is their emotional alchemy, how they transformed despair into determination. A Ukrainian folk song from the 1800s, Oi u Luzi Chervona Kalina, lay dormant for generations until 2022, when it roared back as a rallying cry against Russian invasion. The same phenomenon happened with medieval ballads. A tune about a lost harvest could resurface decades later as a labor union anthem. This longevity reveals music's unique ability to carry hope across generations, preserving the spark of resistance until the moment is ripe. The thread connecting all these movements isn't just sound, it's survival. From the plague-ravaged villages of medieval Europe to the streets of modern Tehran, music has given the powerless a way to say, "We are still here." We remember, and when the right chord strikes, we will rise. The instruments may have changed, but the song remains the same, a reminder that oppression is temporary, but the human need to sing back at darkness, that's eternal. It's tempting to hear every medieval folk song as a secret rebel anthem, to imagine that every lyric about plowing fields or wandering minstrels was dripping with hidden meaning. But the truth is far more nuanced. For every ballad that doubled as a battle plan, dozens more were exactly what they seemed: simple stories, jokes, or love songs meant to lighten the burdens of daily life. Historians face a delicate challenge separating genuine rebel codes from coincidental phrases that only seem subversive through modern eyes. Take the cheerful drinking song, The Miller's Merry Wife. At first glance, its bawdy tale of infidelity might appear to mock the nobility's hypocrisy, but dig deeper, and you'll find versions of the same tune across Europe with no connection to uprisings, just universal humor about human folly. Context is everything. A lyric about the greedy wolf could certainly reference an oppressive lord, or it might just be a literal wolf troubling local shepherds. The key lies in corroborating evidence. When a song appears suddenly before a documented revolt, then vanishes from records afterward, that's a strong clue. In Sussex, England, researchers found a previously obscure ballad about the Thorny Crown, circulating in the weeks before the 1489 tax riots, its lyrics mirroring rebel grievances word for word. Yet that same phrase appears innocently in centuries of harvest hymns, proving that timing and local circumstances turn ordinary words into weapons. Even melody patterns can mislead. Some scholars once believed any song using a call and response structure was inherently rebellious, since it allowed leaders to cue followers. But this format was also common in sea shanties and farming chants, practical tools for coordinating labor, not just revolt. The difference often lay in performance. A work song about hauling nets stayed literal when fishermen sang it at dawn, but the same tune might transform into a rebel signal if a minstrel slowed its tempo and emphasized certain phrases at a midnight gathering. Without eyewitness accounts, these distinctions blur. The most persistent myth that rebels invented entirely new songs for their cause. In reality, they usually hijacked existing hits. Familiar melodies traveled faster, and tweaking a few lyrics was safer than composing something from scratch. This recycling makes confirmation even trickier. A ballad about the stolen bride might have been pure entertainment in one village, while in another, the bride symbolized common land seized by a monastery. Only by cross-referencing court records, tax rolls, and surviving diaries can historians spot these deliberate distortions. What separates conspiracy from coincidence is often the reaction of those in power. When authorities banned specific songs or punished singers disproportionately, they essentially confirmed the lyrics' seditious intent. A French duke's 1512 decree ordering the arrest of anyone humming the Lark's Lament tells us more about the song's true purpose than any lyrical analysis could. Meanwhile, tunes that nobles ignored, no matter how sharp their metaphors, likely held no hidden meaning. After all, the best rebel songs walked the line so finely that only the oppressed recognized the blade beneath the melody. This isn't to downplay the brilliance of genuine coded music, only to honor it by distinguishing fact from romantic fiction. For every verifiable rebel anthem, there were countless others that simply helped peasants endure. And that's equally revolutionary in its own way. A lullaby soothing a hungry child or a raucous tavern song easing the ache of serfdom didn't need hidden meanings to matter. Sometimes survival was rebellion enough. The songs that truly changed history were those rare, razor-sharp exceptions, needles of dissent hidden in the haystack of daily life, waiting for the right moment to draw blood. Decoding these hidden rebel songs isn't just about reading lyrics, it's a forensic science of sound. Historians start by collecting every surviving version of a ballad, from crumbling manuscripts to oral traditions passed down through generations. A single line about the crow in the cornfield might appear harmless in one village rendition, but compare it to a dozen others, and suddenly a pattern emerges. In Sussex, it's a crow; in Kent, a vulture; in Normandy, a black-robed judge. Piece by piece, these regional variations reveal a shared code, each adapting the metaphor to local oppressors while keeping the melody intact as the unifying thread. The real breakthroughs come when researchers overlay these songs with rebellion timelines. Take the English peasants' revolt of 1381. Scholars noticed a surge in ballads about the thorny rose in the months leading up to the uprising. At first glance, it's floral imagery, but cross-reference manorial court records, and you'll find repeated complaints about a certain Sir Roscelin, whose coat of arms featured thorns and who notoriously enclosed common lands. Suddenly, the song's popularity makes gruesome sense. It wasn't poetry, it was a wanted poster set to music. Linguistic analysis adds another layer to the puzzle. Medieval peasants spoke in dialects that often baffled their rulers, and rebel songs exploited this. A lyric about the grey mare stumbling might sound like barnyard gossip to a French-speaking noble, but in local Occitan dialect, mare was slang for tax collectors. Historians pore over regional dictionaries and folk sayings to catch these double meanings, like detectives deciphering a criminal's slang. Sometimes the clues hide in plain sight. A cheerful refrain about spring planting takes on new urgency when you realize it always appears in manuscripts alongside records of spring tax collections. The most compelling evidence often comes from the nobility's own panic. When a particular melody suddenly appears in decrees banning seditious noise, you know you've hit pay dirt. After the Jackery Rebellion, French authorities outlawed singing about the fox's wedding, a seemingly innocent folk motif. Only by reading rebel trial transcripts do we learn the phrase secretly celebrated the burning of noble manors, with the fox as the rebel leader and the wedding as the flames. The lords themselves unwittingly preserved these codes by trying too hard to erase them. Modern technology has supercharged this detective work. Audio analysis software can detect subtle rhythmic patterns, like deliberate pauses or stressed syllables, that may have signaled hidden instructions. In Switzerland, researchers found that certain alpine herding calls changed pitch abruptly when sung near castle towns, likely warning of patrols. Elsewhere, 3D modeling of medieval market squares revealed how specific acoustics could make a minstrel's voice carry farther when singing rebel refrains, while muffling dangerous verses when officials drew near. Yet for all these high-tech tools, the human element remains vital. Folklorists interview elderly villagers whose grandparents sang them nonsense rhymes, with odd emphases clues that these were modified rebel tunes. In Portugal, an archivist recently realized that a children's clapping game preserved the exact rhythm once used to coordinate mill workers' strikes. Like paleontologists reconstructing dinosaurs from fragments, historians must sometimes rebuild entire resistance networks from something as fleeting as the way a grandmother hums while kneading bread. The ultimate test when a decoded song predicts history. In 2014, scholars analyzing a 15th century German ballad about the Crow's Feast noticed it spiked in popularity before documented tax riots. The lyrics spoke of 7 black birds feasting on winter seed. 7 years later, digging through neglected tax rolls, they found records showing 7 consecutive harvest failures and 7 new grain taxes imposed by a lord whose crest featured ravens. The song wasn't just commentary, it was an early warning system, proving that music didn't just reflect rebellion, it orchestrated it. Here's the uncomfortable truth historians rarely discuss. Every time they crack the code of a medieval rebel song, they might unknowingly hand modern dictators a playbook for silencing dissent. Imagine a researcher proudly publishing their decryption of a 15th century ballad's hidden instructions, only to realize oppressive regimes could use those same techniques to detect protest songs today. This ethical tightrope, balancing academic discovery against real-world consequences, has sparked fierce debates in scholarly circles. After all, the same patterns that helped peasants evade feudal lords could now help surveillance states identify activists humming forbidden tunes. Some argue transparency is non-negotiable. Dr. Elena Voss of Cambridge famously defended publishing her team's findings on Flemish weaving songs, stating, "We cannot let hypothetical risks dictate historical truth." Her work revealed how rhythmic loom beats synchronized rebel movements, a breakthrough that also, critics noted, exposed universal vulnerabilities in rhythmic protest methods. Others take a more cautious approach. The Oslo Protocol, adopted by several European universities, requires researchers to consult with human rights groups before releasing analyses of historical resistance tactics. One controversial case involved a team redacting key passages about Hungarian winepress songs after Roma activists warned modern grape harvesters still used similar codes. The dilemma deepens when considering oral traditions. Many rebel songs survive today only because oppressed communities guarded their meanings across generations. Publishing full decryptions can feel like intellectual colonialism, extracting secrets protected for centuries only to display them in academic journals. Dr. Kwame Osai's landmark study on Appalachian miners' songs faced backlash when local families recognized their ancestors' strike signals reprinted as scholarly footnotes. These weren't just melodies to us, one community elder protested. They were our grandparents' last defense against company thugs. Technology intensifies these stakes. Facial recognition software can now detect micro-expressions when people hear politically charged music, a modern parallel to medieval lords monitoring tavern singers. AI tools analyzing online protest videos for suspicious musical patterns eerily mirror 15th century decrees banning specific drum rhythms. Some archivists have begun encrypting sensitive portions of their digital collections, allowing access only to verified researchers. Yet even this has pitfalls. When Berlin's Folklife Archive password protected its database of Catalan-resistant songs, it inadvertently made them inaccessible to the descendants of the very rebels who created them. Perhaps the most poignant tension lies in who gets to interpret these songs. For centuries, their power came from being understood only within oppressed communities. Academics decoding them today, often from privileged institutions, risk repeating the dynamics rebels fought against, outsiders dissecting their culture for personal gain. The Zapatista communities of Chiapas offer an alternative model. When ethnographers requested access to their revolutionary corridos, elders insisted scholars learn the songs through participation planting corn, attending assemblies arguing true understanding couldn't be separated from lived struggle. This isn't just academic navel-gazing. In 2019, Myanmar's military government arrested folk singers after historians published papers on how their ancestors used animal metaphors to criticize kings. The regime simply updated their surveillance algorithms to flag lyrics about the tiger in the reeds. Such cases force us to ask, does studying historical resistance inadvertently teach oppressors how to perfect their craft? The answer may lie in embracing ambiguity, honoring that some songs were meant to be felt rather than explained, their codes living on as both shield and sword in humanity's endless dance between power and resistance. Let's put your code-breaking skills to the test with this real medieval lyric. When the cuckoo calls twice at midnight, the wise man checks his barn door. Sounds like harmless farming advice, right? But let's peel back the layers. In 13th century England, the cuckoo was slang for tax collectors notorious for making surprise visits. Twice at midnight often meant the second week of the month when rents were due, and that barn door, that wasn't about grain storage, it was code for the village's hidden armory. What sounds like a farmer's proverb was actually a warning. Tax enforcers are coming next week. Arm yourselves. Now try this one. The miller's daughter spins gold when the moon is high. On the surface, it's a fairy tale image, but in rebel circles, the miller represented corrupt officials skimming flour taxes. Spinning gold hinted at melting down stolen noble coins to fund the rebellion, and moon high signaled midnight raids. The real meaning: meet at the mill to redistribute looted wealth under cover of darkness. These weren't just poems, they were tactical memos disguised as nursery rhymes. Here's what made these codes so effective. They exploited the nobility's blind spots. Lords heard rustic metaphors about crops and weather, not realizing peasants were using agrarian imagery as their own secret language. A line about the red calf in the barley might reference a known informant, the calf, wearing the colors of a rival house red, hiding in a barley field, a literal wanted poster set to music. The best part, if questioned, singers could innocently say, "It's just a farming song, my lord," leaving authorities chasing shadows, but cracking these codes required insider knowledge. Take the phrase, "the crow flies east at matins." To an outsider, it's a random nature observation. but in a village where the church bell's matins ring was deliberately rung late to confuse tax collectors. East meant the direction of the sheriff's manor, and crow was code for a spy. The full message: the sheriff's informant is heading home, now's the time to strike. Without knowing the local context, the lyric was gibberish with it. A perfect stealth announcement. This wasn't just wordplay, it was psychological warfare. Rebels deliberately used imagery from children's games and lullabies because melodies stick in the mind like glue. A lord might ban a song, but he couldn't unhear the tune his own toddler was humming. By the time authorities decoded one lyric, rebels had already tweaked the words, turning censorship into a futile game of whack-aim-hole. The real brilliance: these songs didn't just hide messages, they made remembering them as easy as singing along. Even when peasant rebellions collapsed in blood and fire, their songs refused to die. The melodies that once rallied farmers to battle didn't vanish with the last sword stroke, they seeped into the bones of culture, transforming over generations into folk traditions that carried rebellion's essence in gentler forms. Take England's Cutty Wren, a seemingly innocent children's game song about hunting a small bird. Few who sing it today realize its roots trace back to the brutal suppression of the 1381 Peasants' Revolt, when the wren symbolized King Richard Roman II advisors and the lyrics' violent imagery mirrored rebel vengeance. Over centuries, the song's revolutionary edges softened, but its coded defiance lingered like a ghost in the melody. This cultural alchemy turning failed uprisings into enduring art happened across Europe. In Germany, the 16th century Bundscher Revolt's anthem, once calling peasants to tie their laces, a reference to their iconic tied shoes symbol, evolved into a harmless-sounding dance tune. Yet at village weddings, elders still winked when certain verses played, passing down the hidden meaning like a family heirloom. Similarly, French nursery rhymes about the king who lost his crown began as Jackery Rebellion taunts, their original venom diluted but their subversive structure intact. The songs became time capsules of resistance, their power lying not in open calls to arms, but in the quiet knowledge that ancestors had once dared to fight. What's fascinating is how these melodies adapted to new struggles. A Hungarian harvest song from the 1700s, originally mocking medieval tax collectors, was repurposed to critique Habsburg officials, then later communist apparatchiks. Each generation sanded down the specifics but kept the song's defiant core, like a whetstone sharpening the same blade for different battles. This recyclability made rebel music immortal. When one oppression ended, the tunes simply found new targets. Even melodies banned into obscurity often resurfaced decades later. After authorities crushed the Croatian Matića Gubek uprising in 1573, survivors buried its anthem in lullabies only for it to re-emerge during 19th century nationalist movements, proving some songs outlive empires. The church unwittingly preserved many rebel tunes by absorbing them into hymnody. A 15th century heretic's ballad condemning clerical corruption might later appear as a sanitized Christmas carol, its original lyrics scrubbed but its haunting melody still carrying echoes of dissent. Pilgrimages became especially potent vectors for this cultural survival. When devotees traveled to shrines, they carried regional variants of suppressed songs, mixing them into devotional music until the lines blurred. A Spanish villancico about the shepherd betrayed could simultaneously reference biblical Judas and a local lord's treachery, allowing both interpretations to coexist. Modern folk revivals often accidentally resurrect these coded histories. When 20th century collectors recorded Appalachian ballads descended from English rebel songs, they didn't realize the fair maidens and outlaw lovers in the lyrics were medieval stand-ins for peasant leaders. Even today, protest musicians unconsciously echo ancient techniques. Bob Dylan's Masters of War employs the same allegorical weaponry as a minstrel's ballad about the blacksmith's cruel tools. The through line is unmistakable. Oppression changes its uniform, but resistance keeps singing the same timeless notes. Perhaps the greatest testament to this legacy is how thoroughly these songs fooled later historians. Victorian folklorists cheerfully catalogued what they deemed charming rural ditties, missing the revolutionary subtext hiding in plain sight. It took modern scholars cross-referencing peasant court records with song variants to realize how many innocent folk tunes were actually victory laps for failed revolts, a way for descendants to honor their ancestors' courage without risking the noose. The songs became living memorials, ensuring that even the lost battles were never truly forgotten. Nowhere is this more poignant than in Ireland, where 18th century hedge schools secretly taught banned Gaelic songs alongside scripture. Children memorizing seemingly simple tunes about the wandering harper were actually learning chronicles of crushed rebellions, their melodies serving as mnemonic devices for history too dangerous to write down. Today, those same songs fill pubs during rugby matches, their revolutionary roots blurred but their spirit intact, proof that culture can be both sword and shield, cutting through time to carry voices the victors tried to silence. The true genius of these musical survivors lies in their ambiguity. A Breton fisherman's shanty about stormy seas might mourn a 14th century naval revolt or a 19th century labor strike, or both simultaneously. Like a palimpsest, each generation overwrites the song's immediate meaning while preserving its emotional truth. This fluidity makes rebel music eternally relevant. The notes remain the same, but the pain and hope they carry adapt to fit whatever chains need breaking. So the next time you hear an old folk tune that gives you chills, listen closer. That haunting refrain might not just be a melody, it could be a 600-year-old battle cry, whispering across the centuries that no defeat is ever final as long as someone still sings. Those medieval peasants humming rebel tunes in market squares might seem distant from our world of smartphones and social media, but their struggle echoes louder than ever in modern protests. The same ingenious tactics that let 14th century farmers coordinate under feudal lords' noses are being reinvented today, from Venezuelan students embedding protest directions in reggaeton lyrics to Myanmar activists using traditional puppet show melodies to bypass military censors. This history matters because it reveals an eternal truth. When people are silenced, they don't stop speaking, they just learn to sing. Consider how modern protest movements unconsciously mirror medieval strategies. The Arab Spring's call and response chants functioned exactly like minstrels teaching rebel songs line by line, easy to learn, impossible to unhear. Hong Kong's Umbrella Revolution saw demonstrators communicating through pop song playlists, much like peasants using regional folk tunes. Even Black Lives Matter's adaptation of spirituals continues the tradition of wrapping urgent messages in culturally sacred forms. The parallels are uncanny because the core challenge remains unchanged: how to organize when those in power control every conventional channel of communication. What medieval rebels understood and what today's activists rediscover is that music weaponizes memory. A viral tweet can be deleted, a pamphlet confiscated, but a melody lingers in the mind like a stubborn seed. When Belarusian protesters in 2020 chanted century-old folk songs, they weren't just honoring tradition. They were exploiting the same cognitive loophole medieval peasants did. Authorities can arrest someone carrying a protest sign, but how do you arrest a crowd humming a tune everyone knows but no one admits to leading? This is why tyrants from medieval dukes to modern autocrats share an irrational fear of music, its dissent that can't be confiscated at a checkpoint. The deeper lesson lies in how these songs turn isolation into community. A medieval peasant hearing a coded ballad didn't just receive information. They felt the visceral relief of knowing others shared their anger. Fast forward to Chile's 2019 uprising, where protesters transformed a folk song about river pollution into an anthem against inequality. As thousands sang together in Plaza Baquedano, they experienced the same catharsis as those long-ago farmers realizing their private grievances were collective wounds. Music doesn't just convey messages, it forges the emotional bonds that make resistance possible. Perhaps most crucially, this history shatters the myth that oppressed people need outside saviors. Medieval peasants didn't wait for literate scholars to lead them. They used the tools at hand, transforming lullabies into battle plans. Today's marginalized communities do the same, whether it's Iranian women turning nursery rhymes into feminist anthems or West Papuan activists encoding independence messages in traditional drumming. The genius of musical resistance is its accessibility. It requires no special training, just the courage to add your voice to the chorus. This legacy challenges us to reconsider what we classify as real resistance. Modern media often valorizes armed rebellions or charismatic leaders, while dismissing cultural subversion as secondary. Yet history shows how a well-timed song can do more damage to tyranny than 1,000 swords. When Serbian youth toppled Milosevic by flooding the streets with rock music, or when Polish workers broke communist censorship by singing banned Christmas carols, they proved medieval peasants' most radical insight. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't force, but a melody so contagious even the oppressor's children start humming it. The ultimate testament to this power, how desperately authoritarians still try to suppress it. China's ban on Tibetan folk songs, Russia's arrests of punk bands, and Eritrea's imprisonment of musicians all confirm what medieval lords learned too late. You can outlaw a song, but you can't unthink it. Because music does something extraordinary, it lets the powerless rewrite the script. A peasant's ballad mocking a duke, a slave's spiritual mapping escape routes, a protest chant naming corrupt politicians. All assert that the voiceless have voices, and those voices will harmonize across time until justice finally sings back. Preserving these rebel songs is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Their power was in their fleeting nature, passed mouth to ear across generations without ever touching parchment. For centuries, the only records were human memories, with grandmothers teaching grandchildren the same tunes that once rallied villages to rebellion, their original meanings fading into harmless folk charm. That's what makes modern efforts to reconstruct them so extraordinary. It's detective work where the clues are half-remembered lullabies and the occasional scribbled lyric hidden in the margins of a monk's prayer book. Take the case of Dr. Marion Fletcher, a musicologist who spent a decade tracking a single melody across remote alpine villages. What began as a simple harvest song in one valley revealed itself as a rebel call to arms when she pieced together fragments from 12 different regions. The key breakthrough came when she matched a Swiss grandmother's humming to a 15th century wood cut depicting a peasant revolt, the same tune played on a pipe by a figure labeled the Piper of the Uprising. Suddenly, a children's rhyme about the fox's dance transformed into historical evidence of coordinated resistance. Technology is now breathing new life into these vanishing echoes. In Portugal, researchers used AI to analyze hundreds of field recordings made in the 1950s, isolating patterns in vocal cadences that hinted at coded meanings. A seemingly cheerful fishing song from the Azores, when slowed down, revealed rhythmic pauses aligning perfectly with lighthouse signals once used to warn of naval patrols. Meanwhile, in Wales, spectral imaging on a burnt medieval manuscript uncovered scorched lyrics to a band ballad. its words confirming local legends about a minstrel executed for singing storms into men's hearts. The race to preserve these songs isn't just academic, it's an act of justice. When Basque shepherds sing centuries-old mountain calls today, they're often unknowingly carrying melodies that once guided rebels through secret passes. Projects like the European Oral Tradition Archive now work directly with marginalized communities, helping them reclaim songs stripped of context by time or tyranny. In Occitania, elders wept hearing reconstructed versions of Cathar resistance hymns last sung before their ancestors were massacred, proof that music can outlive even genocide. Yet the fragility of this legacy is staggering. A single village in Bavaria holds the last living memory of the Thresher's Anthem, a tune once used to coordinate Germany's 15th century peasant wars. Its keeper, a 90-year-old farmer, learned it from his great-grandmother, who whispered it as bad luck to sing aloud. Such songs exist on borrowed time, their full meanings often dying with their last true bearers. That's why archivists aren't just recording notes, they're documenting the stories, gestures, and even silences that give the music context. A pause between verses might have signaled danger. A tapped foot could have counted patrol intervals. The most poignant discoveries emerge when oral traditions collide with physical evidence. In York, England, archaeologists excavating a medieval tavern latrine found a trove of carved bone flutes. When played, their finger holes produced the exact intervals of a melody still sung in nearby villages as a nonsense rhyme. Chemical analysis revealed one flute was clutched in a skeleton's hand, likely a minstrel killed mid-performance during a crackdown. Suddenly, a children's game song gained new weight as a likely rebel signal, preserved through 8 centuries of innocent repetition. What's at stake isn't just historical trivia, it's reclaiming the ingenuity of people written out of official histories. When we recover a song like The Miller's Secret, once banned for its double meanings about tax evasion, we're not just preserving a melody, we're honoring the intellectual rebellion of illiterate farmers who outsmarted their oppressors with nothing but wit and rhythm. These songs remind us that resistance isn't always forged in steel, sometimes it's spun from something as delicate as a tune, passed hand to hand like a weapon too light for tyrants to notice until it's too late. From the crowded market squares of medieval Europe to the protest-choked streets of modern capitals, one truth echoes across the centuries. When people are silenced, they turn to music as their secret language. Those seemingly simple peasant songs weren't just entertainment. They were lifelines, threading hope through the fabric of oppression like golden strands in a dark tapestry. The brilliance of these hidden melodies wasn't just in their codes, but in how they transformed something as ordinary as a harvest ballad into a weapon sharper than any sword. Think about the sheer audacity of this system. At a time when literacy was a privilege of the powerful, when speaking out meant the whip or the noose, peasants crafted an entire communication network using nothing but rhythm and rhyme. They turned their oppressors' arrogance against them because what lord would suspect that the ditty his stable boy was humming actually contained battle plans? This wasn't just survival, it was psychological warfare, proving that creativity could outmaneuver brute force. The legacy of these rebel songs lives on in ways their creators could never have imagined. That protest chant you heard at a recent rally, its call and response structure mirrors how medieval minstrels taught resistance line by line, the viral protest anthem spreading on TikTok. It's the digital descendant of market songs that once traveled mouth to ear across kingdoms. Even the way modern activists repurpose pop hits to carry political messages follows the same playbook. Take a familiar tune, tweak the lyrics, and let the melody do the dangerous work. What's most inspiring isn't just the songs themselves, but what they represent: the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be silenced. Those peasants didn't have social media or printing presses, but they had something equally powerful: their voices, their culture, and the collective memory of their communities. In a world that told them they were powerless, their music whispered back, "We are here, we remember, and we will be heard." So the next time an old folk tune catches your ear, don't just hum along, listen deeper. That nursery rhyme about blackbirds baked in a pie, it might have once warned of spies in the village. The sea shanty with the oddly specific counting rhythm. Perhaps it once coordinated smuggling operations under cover of fog. History's greatest rebellions weren't always fought with cannons and cavalry charges. Some were waged in the space between notes, in the breath between verses, in the defiant act of keeping a melody alive. If this journey through hidden musical histories resonated with you, consider joining our community of curious minds. Hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the past's untold stories, and drop a comment below sharing which modern songs you think will be remembered as anthems of resistance a century from now. After all, the next chapter in this story isn't just about the songs we've inherited, it's about the ones we're creating right